Welcome to Carly's Colorful Corner, where we will learn how to paint our narwhals. Now that our narwhal is actually drawn, it's ready to be painted. You're going to grab your oil pastels or your crayons. We're going to use these to block in some extra ornamental details like seaweed grass, or maybe some starfish, or maybe some fish off into the distance. Totally up to you. Now, when I started videotaping this lesson, I did not use oil pastel for my seaweed. I wish I had. So, I highly recommend that you use it instead. I would have liked to use a bright green for the base of my seaweed color and a dark green for the shadow. My shadow would have been on the right hand side. Um, just a preference. It makes it a lot easier for you to paint because all you got to do is just glide your paintbrush over over the oil pastel that you've placed on the paper. When I did this lesson, I didn't do that, and the painting took me twice as long and it didn't look as good. So I highly recommend that you use oil pastel for all your details if your details allow it. If your details are super small, I would use crayon instead with a pointed tip. The trick to using oil pastel is making sure that your tips are nice and clean. Here I kind of forgot how to do that, or I forgot to do that. That's why you're going to see a little bit of color inside my white as I am coloring this bubble. But the way to make sure that your tip is clean is to look at the tip. If there's color on your oil pastel tip, then use a paper towel or a piece of cloth to rub that extra color off. What you could do is for your highlight, you could use white. You could maybe even put in the dark shadows first with a dark oil pastel color and then lighten it up using white. White can be your blender. This is how you paint with oil pastel. For this video, I did not do this. I had a different video, but it didn't record correctly or upload correctly, and my picture was entirely black for the full demonstration. So just take my word for it. Use darker colors for your shadow and use white to blend into the bubble to kind of like start from dark to light. Next step is after you're done putting in all your details with your oil pastel is to create a wash. Washes are used to fill in large amounts of spaces quickly and efficiently. That's why I love washes. Every lesson that we do will probably have some sort of wash in it. It's also a great way to fill in a space before adding finer, more darker, or more pristine details on top with the use of layering. Washes are fantastic. So the first step to creating a wash is adding a clear coat of water. I like to, if you have a 9 by 12 paper, I like to work in my areas by thirds, specifically because if you have good paper, if you spend all this time watering down from top to bottom, you are going to have your top, it's going to start becoming dry, and then you won't be able to add your color very efficiently. So just work in thirds, skip over any unpasteled details like your narwhal or your horn, and if you need to adjust to a smaller brush, then do so. When you're ready, you're going to add color to that and you're going to spread it from one side of the paper to the other side. Your layer of water is going to act like a vehicle. It's going to help that color spread evenly and smoothly from one side to the other side of your picture. Now, if you want blips of darker blue or maybe darker purple or whatever color you've chosen for your water, you can add those in there. But I would wait for that first layer of watercolor to dry because you don't want too much paper and you don't want to work your paper too much because it's going to then start shedding. You want a nice, thin, glistening line of water. Put your base color down, then come back when it's dry to add even darker colors. Remember, darker color means more watercolor versus water. So eye it. Take your time, experiment for one little space of your paper before going all over the place, and work your way down as you go. As you're observing me doing this, you can see how nice and easy that oil pastel pops through the watercolor. This is scientifically, this is scientific. The oil and the wax, they don't mix with water. They're like frenemies. They go well together as a technique, but they don't mix well together as friends. So anytime you want like really bright color in your watercolor piece or you want to just spread a wash from top to bottom of your paper without having to worry about it mixing in with other shapes like your seaweed or your bubbles, then use oil pastel or crayon to achieve this goal. You can use different versions or different shades or gradient of oil pastel, and you could use a lighter oil pastel to kind of blend in the color to kind of paint or have a painterly effect on your bubbles and seaweed or starfish. Totally up to you, but you can see how easy it is and why I should have done that with my seaweed from the get-go. So in order to fill in the space of my narwhal, I'm going to use a wash for this guy as well. But I'm not going to touch my narwhal until I am done with my water. Then I'm going to start from the top of my narwhal and work my way down, specifically because the top of my narwhal will be near a surface that is mostly dry versus the bottom of my narwhal. This will prevent colors from mixing, having mudding of line strokes, and it will ensure that you have like a clear picture when you're making your painting. So just keep that in mind. Work on surfaces that have already been dried. We're adding a very thin layer of water again, only this time it's going to be on your narwhal's body, so you might need to use a smaller brush. You make the judgment here, or the judgment call. Avoid your mouth and avoid your horns. If you wanted a different color than purple, then I would make sure that your brush is nice and clean before starting this process. I myself didn't mind having the blue in there because I specifically kind of wanted like a purple, but I don't have purple on my palette. I have to mix red and blue. So this is why you see me going back and adding a little bit of red and feathering it out, and then adding a little bit of blue and feathering it out. I'm doing this by mixing my color onto my paper. But if you have purple or if you have the color that you are desiring for your piece, then just use that. That's not that big of a deal. Don't be afraid of painting over your speckles. You want your wash to be thin enough where you can see your speckles though, because then you're going to go over it once it's dry with a darker color, and this would be called adding texture using dry on dry. But let's focus on our narwhal's body as a whole first. Now, I love using washes as a form of shading while my water is, while the surface of my paper is still a little bit damp enough to allow me to spread colors fluidly from one area to the next. I'm going to add a little more blue or a little more darkness to the underside of my narwhal because this is going to be my shadow spot. I'm also going to add a little bit around the tail as it bends over. You choose if you want to add these pieces. I just like a little hint of realism when I'm doing my drawings or my paintings for that matter. while you might need to bolden that color or add an extra layer of blue, I'd also highly recommend using like a darker, vibrant color of what you used for your narwhal's body to do the outline of the narwhal itself instead of black, specifically because black kind of dulls or muddles color. Once the bottom of your narwhal and the top of your narwhal is dry, you might even add even a darker shade of color on the outside of your shadow to kind of make that shadow pop. And then add detail of speckles and fill in your eye. You're going to do this process like you did with the narwhal. You're going to do the same thing with the horns. Start with kind of a little bit of a wash. Do a really, really light translucent color on your horn, and then start adding a little bit more of paint on the bottom of your horn and work your way, kind of scrape it up towards the top to kind of give you that shadowed effect for your horns underside. I'm not going to show you what I'm doing with the seaweed for this project because I specifically highly recommend that you use oil pastel or crayon at the beginning of this lesson instead of painting it like I did in the video, because your colors are going to come out brighter, it's going to be less complicated, it's going to be easier to do. So I highly recommend you guys doing that. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2. That concludes the end of our video. For more tips and tricks, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Carly's Colorful Corner or follow us on Facebook for deals and for updated features. In the meantime, if you're looking more for a personal step-by-step in-person demonstration, take a peek at our OutSchool platform. And until then, I look forward to seeing you in the classroom.